Well, welcome everybody to week 4 of our March online program for the alumni of the Sunshine Coast Health Center. And the March program is all about, is addiction primarily about biology, or is it something else, or is it some kind of weird mixture or whatever? And the reason that this is important to you is because it will dictate a lot of how you think about this thing you're struggling with. If you believe it's a disease, then you have to accept, at least right now, there is no cure, so you're kind of stuck with it. If you believe it's a disease, then you probably have to believe that your addiction is the effect of this substance entering into your brain. Okay? And that's very big nowadays. I mean, I can't remember the last conference I went to that didn't have this big thing on brain chemistry. And textbooks, here's a typical textbook. I mean, look at, brain pictures and little graphs pointing everything. I mean, look at this stuff, right? This is really typical nowadays, right? Everybody's doing brain science. And everybody agrees that addiction does have this physical basis in your brain. Well, not everybody, but say most people believe that. The question is whether all that stuff happening in the brain is actually a disease or an illness, or whether it's just interesting stuff that happens in the brain. That's the big debate. So if you're Dr. William Miller at the University of New Mexico, big addiction research outfit, you say, yes, there's a physical basis in the brain, but it's about the self-regulation mechanisms, and we'd be hard-pressed to call that a disease. But if you're Dr. Nora Volkow at NIDA, we say, yes, it's a disease. And that gives you some sense of this hot debate. And in fact, everybody knows that there's tremendous debate on each side of the coin on this one. And everybody's arguing back and forth. Anyway, but there's a lot of people today who do not believe it is a disease. For example, let's say you have someone with a gambling problem. Is gambling an addiction? Or another way to phrase it, is gambling a disease? Or is gambling an illness? Well, this is kind of a problem because we don't have any substance entering into the brain to create the disease, right? Same thing with sex addiction. Eating addiction may be a bit trickier because we are ingesting food, so that's a hotly debated one too. But the process addictions, as we call them, the non-drug addictions, these are these addictions. And a lot of people who believe in the disease model actually say, no, those are not addictions because there's no drug entering into the brain. And so all sorts of complications arise with this whole disease or illness thing. And a lot of people, a lot of experts knowing all this research have pointed out things like, for example, look at all those Vietnam veterans who were officially addicted to heroin. They got home and the vast majority of them stopped using heroin. Well, if addiction is a disease, and when you get the drug in your brain and you lose control, then how on earth did all these people just stop using heroin? Doesn't seem to make much sense. And a lot of people are pointing out, remember Rat Park, right? So here's Canada's Bruce Alexander making this wonderful experiment and showing that the only reason a rat keeps using morphine is simply because he's stuck in this disgusting cage. He's bored out of his mind. He's lonely. And he's probably totally stressed out because this is unnatural. You put him in Rat Park, sort of a Disneyland for rats, and let him do whatever the heck he wants to do and play with the cedar shavings and get stuff to climb in and have the opposite sex around, and all of a sudden he doesn't want the morphine anymore, right? So a lot of the experts who don't believe it's a disease are pointing to research like this. And we think that maybe the environment has got a lot to do with it. Maybe we think psychology has got more to do with it than just this idea that the brain is hijacked by the drug. And in fact, I've been looking at some textbooks, some psychology textbooks used in university classes, with the date 2010 as the copyright. And they are routinely now providing lots of evidence to suggest that, no, it's not a disease. So that's kind of interesting. So the evidence is piling up that maybe this whole disease concept may be dated. And on the other hand, we could probably find a bunch of textbooks who are quite convinced it's like all biology, all brain chemistry. Yeah. So again, but I just want to point out this week that there's this debate going on, and Although I talked about Dr. George Valent and Dr. Nora Volkow, to be fully aware that a lot of equally competent experts who have written just as many books and published just as many scholarly papers have begun to say, no, it is not a disease. But most of those people will agree there is a physical basis in the brain, but they just don't consider it a disease, or as one of my neuroscience professors said, yeah, it's a kind of an interesting thing that happens in the brain. At any rate, so here you have lots of conflicting evidence for you to think about. And it's important that you do think about this and struggle through it, because it will dictate a lot of how you deal with things in your recovery. Whether you believe it's primarily a matter, your recovery is primarily a matter of absolute abstinence. Keep away from sugar, keep away from caffeine, keep away from nicotine, keep away from Tylenol 3 for a root canal, right? Because if you believe it's a disease, the common idea is the disease is created by the effect of this substance on your brain. On the other hand, if you don't believe it's a disease, if it's a matter of environment, it's a matter of finding meaning and purpose and all that stuff, you're going to probably take a different approach to your recovery. But at any rate, the other thing to point out from all this is, yeah, there's lots of debate on each side of the equation, right? So struggle with it and come to terms with it. And whatever you decide, I'm sure you can find tons of evidence to back it up. But the big point is that the disease model seems to be under fire lately. And although Nora Volkow at NIDA is quite convinced and very public about it, but there's an awful lot of experts who are beginning to wonder about this whole disease model and whether it's really going to be helpful in leading us into recovery. At any rate, things to think about, right? Which is the key to the process. Because as you remember, you are the author of your life. So you're going to have to make decisions about this stuff and come to terms with it. All I can tell you is the experts are divided. Up to you. Okay, at any rate, that's March's online program, and we'll be back in April with another one.